Welcome to Jim White's Opportunity Investing webinar. Jim has been investing, coaching executives, and turning around companies for over 30 years. Now your host, Dr. Jim White.
Hello, this is Jim White. It is April the 14th, 2020, and welcome to my Opportunity Investing webinar. Our topic today is how to manage a potential 32% unemployment crisis in America. You heard me. The economists are projecting in 2020 we could have up to 32% unemployment crisis in America. It is hard to believe we started January 2020 with only 3.6% unemployment. Today we're hovering around 13%. More than 17 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits in the last 4 weeks. Economists project the second quarter U.S. economy will shrink by 40%. Sobering projections. Given the COVID-19, and it seems like every time we bring that name up, it just brings chills. COVID-19. What a crisis, what a world-changing event. So given COVID-19's reach through the economy, bankruptcy, and I'm going to use that word, so I want you to bear with me a little bit, and we're going to talk about what to do with this 32% unemployment actually becomes a reality. So given the COVID-19's reach through the economy, bankruptcy is a major threat. This happens when one company's failure to pay its bill weakens the financial health of another, which in turn undermines the viability of another, and so on and so on, and thus causing a chain reaction. Economic stress from the present pandemic is far more critical than it was during the 2008-2009 crisis, for those that remember that. At this time, the firms that pose the greatest danger are not limited to the financial sector as it was in 2008 and 2009. To mitigate this risk, companies and countries, need, and I want you to take some notes here because once we get through my intro, we're going to come back and drill down on this. My favorite word, you that join us from week to week, my favorite word, drill down on it. To mitigate the risk, companies and countries need a too connected to fail policy. Now, I've used that term for a lot of years under different circumstances, and some in high unemployment. Too connected to fail policy. To provide liquidity to companies whose bankruptcies stand to have the largest ripple effect. This is the real economy equivalent of the too big to fail strategy during the last financial crisis. Too big to fail strategy. Remember that? During the last financial crisis, and all the banks, and we started shoring up. To combat potential bankruptcy chains, policymakers have 4 options. And you're probably saying, well, that's pretty bold, Jim, but I laid out 4 options in preparing for our session today. Option number 1, governments can improve companies' cash flow by boosting demand for their products and including by providing additional income to displaced workers. This approach has already been adopted aggressively, but for many reasons, including that many companies simply can't open while urgent social distancing measures are in place. This won't be enough to stem the risk of substantial numbers of bankruptcy. Therefore, it could lead into this 32%. Second, they've been policymakers, politicians, they could simply allow a massive wave of bankruptcies to happen. with the view that companies can keep operating under bankruptcy. It's not clear, however, that the bankruptcy system could handle such a massive amount of filings. So we got to think about that. More importantly, and this is really critical, as I was working on this, I was thinking about it, going back and doing some research. And like I said in the previous webinars, we've had 47 different crises. I've seen many of them started in the early 70s, as I've stated in the previous session. But more importantly, bankruptcy is not nearly as painless as some advocates of this idea suggest. As many people said, well, just let them go bankrupt, right? See what happens, right? That's happening. You kind of very low rumblings out there. You may not have seen it. It may not be being covered right now in the news, but these discussions are occurring. Just this morning, was a news feed. I had, I think, Yahoo Finance and JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, their CEO, had stated that JP Morgan is setting aside $6.8 billion in additional reserves in anticipation of failures that's going to be forthcoming. Now that's $6.8 billion in additional reserves from JP Morgan. So there's anticipation here. Now, we all know that the health and welfare of all of our citizens is the highest priority. And it's a guessing game right now as to when the states, and also there's an argument to who's going to make that decision, right? So we'll stay away from the politics on that this evening, but there's an argument there. But when we're going to start opening up the economy again, when's that going to happen? Your guess is good as mine right now. So as we continue to talk about bankruptcy, and as I said, with some folks are advocates of that in past years, you can go back and do some research, but I'm here to tell you that the equity and debt owners will suffer as expected, but workers do as well. So when that happens, everybody suffers. And evidence suggests that in the 7 years following a company bankruptcy, workers' annual wages fall more than 2/3 in the present value, and by 10% in the year of bankruptcy. So this is no good thing. And those that are old enough remember back in the 80s, that was kind of a standard operating procedure for a lot of the leverage buyout firms, was to do a leverage buyout and then go in and do Chapter 11, if you will. And I mean, that was a strategy. It was just a horrible strategy, but that was a strategy. So bankruptcy is a challenge, but it is an option. An economy with a substantial share of its firms going through bankruptcy would be a disaster zone for years to come, in my opinion. Now, the third thing that I decided to include this evening, policymakers could try to minimize bankruptcies among the most, I'm going to use the word, sympathetic companies. Okay, I chose that word, sympathetic companies. The targeted relief that the U.S. and other governments are providing to small and medium-sized enterprise reflects this approach. However, the mom and pop stores have been devastated by the loss of revenue in the past 4 to 6 weeks. And it's hard to understand why I should say it's not hard to understand why many people believe that they deserve assistance. And we're going to come back and visit that a little bit more momentarily as well. And I say of these choices, the 4 is finally, and here's where we haven't focused enough. Governments could target companies whose bankruptcies would trigger, and I want you to follow me close here, that could trigger bankruptcies, that could trigger the largest chain reactions. Those that are too connected to fail. These include companies that are central to tight integrated supply chains. Supplier credit networks have many of the same features that cause some of the concern about financial middlemen, middle people, middle persons, if you will, during the last financial crisis. Governments may have too little information to properly evaluate these connections, but network science using data provided by the relevant industries could help identify the most connected companies. And bear with me, I'm going to bring it all together here momentarily, which may often, but not always, be the largest ones in these sectors. Okay? Inevitably, we will wind up using a combination of the four approaches, in my opinion, that I've laid out here. But note that tension exists across some of them, as you could well imagine. In particular, the most sympathetic companies may have little impact on bankruptcy chains, and some of the most connected firms may not be at all sympathetic. As policymakers consider their next moves, they should also acknowledge that so far they've done too little to head off the risk of cascaded bankruptcy. They've done too little. And I'm sure I'll get some feedback on this, which is okay. But in my opinion, they've done too little. In the US, for example, most of the $454 billion provided in the CARES Act to inject liquidity into small companies, 500 employees or less, has yet to kick in. And for many reasons where that they weren't ready. The application, once it was finally released, the application process and the banking system and just not enough. So it hasn't kicked in the way the intent, and it's not enough. It's not enough to inject into the economy. Now, hopefully, we're going to see some more come out because we need it. The additional funding to go into what I call a too connected to fail facility, in which key criteria for allocating assistance are based on how central companies are within their production and financial networks. Now, how important are those networks are to the economy as a whole? They're important. Now, bear with me, we're talking about too connected to fail, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you some examples of that. I'm going to give you some examples of what I've actually used in many years in the past. Not only in crisis time, but it's a strategy that works extremely well. So, if we have bankruptcies and they start cascading, we still have time to stop it. If it starts, it's going to. But we still have time to stop the bankruptcies, in my opinion, right now. But time is running out. So the question is this: whose crystal ball are we going to look at to say, and starting say from the east, since I'm in my home office in Greenwich, Connecticut this evening, and have been here for about a month. And as we are working, we're looking at different vendors that fall into this connection, right? Now, the people that hopefully that's going to be watching this are business owners, politicians, policymakers, and individuals. Now, before I go back and talk about the connection, as individuals, what can we do if you've been laid off? Well, You can pick up any newspaper for the most part, or you can turn on any news channel and you can hear stories, horror stories about people trying to apply for the unemployment benefits and they can't get through. And then I saw one article where I believe it was in Hialeah, Florida, where people were driving through and because the website had crashed and they were given individual applications. So the unemployment benefits are absolutely critical right now. Now, this is probably going to sting, and I'm probably going to get some real kickback on this. As individuals, if we can learn any lessons from this crisis or any other crisis, is that we always need to have some money in reserve. We live too close to the edge, in my opinion, in America. And a lot of people are going to say, well, Jim, we live from paycheck to paycheck. And I understand that. But when you do that, and how do we as a nation get to the point where we're not having to do that paycheck to paycheck? So when you get laid off, you have no backup resources. It becomes devastating. So I've said this, I believe, in 1986 and in the 90s and the 2000s, same thing over and over and over, that we individuals, we cannot live too close to the edge. I don't care how much money it is, you're setting a little side, and the people looking at it say, well, Jim, that doesn't help me right now because I got a problem, because I don't have a job and my unemployment has not kicked in. Well, understand. Also understand in certain states, and California being one of our industries, that Central Coast Cooling, Post Harvest Technologies, Growers Ice, our companies in California and in Arizona, we're considered that what's that? Geez, I'm going blank here. What's the proper language? Critical industry that we're working. Well, that puts some challenges on us as well. But where I'm going with that, if you are unemployed, one of the things you're looking around to see what industries that are still functioning. And bear with me, hang on. I'm going with this. I'm going to tie it all together here. So, if you're obtaining unemployment benefits and you need to be using this time to, number one, upgrade your skills. Number two, you need to be looking around for those industries that are still working, and you need to reach out to those firms. And I remember doing just that when I got out of the Army in April of 1971. Dating myself, April of 1971. I was trying to get back in school, and I started knocking on doors. In those days, I would go door to door, and I'm specifically applying at construction equipment dealerships. And I walked in, and hat in hand, and they said, looking for a job. I'll do anything at any price, anything. I just need to go to work, right? So even though social distancing is the thing to be doing, our firms, we've been proactive on our social distancing in all of our firms. Think whatever it is to think, that we've been not affected thus far. I don't want to jinx us that we haven't had any COVID on any of our companies and in our campuses. So if you're sitting there and wondering what to do, look at those industries that you might be able to find some help with, okay? Now, I'm going to go back and just talk briefly about this too connected to fail facility. And this is for the business owners. And this, if we are looking at, and even though you may not be able to work, this crisis will come to an end. And we're going to have to get the economy moving back. And part of that will be to, once you have an opportunity to go back to work, open your business, this is where you need to reach out to your customers. I'm going to say downstream, and then your vendors. I'm going to use the word upstream for a moment. That's when you reach out and where everybody's got to help each other, especially right now. So you have this chain. So you're here in the center. You sell a product or service to, and you buy product and services from. So, and then you got this chain reaction where if you're on open terms, that's when you're talking to your vendor, or I say everybody's going to support each other and maybe carrying some of our accounts receivable, extending more terms, doing things like that is going to help us. And that's what I mean about two connected to fail facility. And if we can figure out exactly how we can come together, and you business owners, you need to be, if you're not doing it, you need to be reaching out right now to your customers, and those extent that can maybe pay you earlier, and to your vendors that might be able to help you to do some renegotiation and on your accounts payable, if you will. Then SBA. There's a lot of programs right now. I know it appears to be somewhat complex, but there are a lot of programs out there that is offering refinance. There's also other areas that you need to be looking at. For example, Facebook has made available $100 million for grants. Yes, $100 million for grants. So you need to go to facebook.com, look at the criteria. And so there's a lot that we can be doing to support and to make sure that we stay in the game, right? We got to keep this unemployment down. We got to do everything we possibly can. And again, I know that we have industries due to the social distancing that we cannot work, but there's things that we can do as well. So once again, too connected to fail. I want you to take a look at that. And if you are working from home, you're in place and you're shelter in place and you're working from home, continue to do your networking, right? Continue to reach out and see what you can do to support the colleagues that have maybe been laid off. So if we'll help each other, we'll get through this. So with that, I'm going to conclude with this main thing: too big to fail, too connected to fail. Now, too connected to fail, if you will follow that process and you can reach out downstream and upstream, we will do a lot to help mitigate this unemployment situation. At that, I'm going to thank you. Have a good night, and we will talk to you next time. Good evening.
Thank you for your participation and interest in Jim White's Opportunity Investing webinar. To stay in touch with Jim, please go to www.opportunityinvesting.com.